Welcome to Off Panel, Sketch.com's weekly podcast. This week we have one of my very favorite writers on the show. He's one of the people behind the fantastic comics like Major Bummer, The Creep, B.P.R.D, and right now you can find him on Rumble at Image Comics with James Harren. It's John Arcudi. Thanks for joining the show, John.
Hi, thanks for having me, obviously.
Well, so for years you've been focused on the Mignolaverse. You've been doing that, particularly B.P.R.D, but now Rumble's where you're at. One of the things I want to just ask is, like, was it just time to focus on your own work for now? Is that why you are really focused on Rumble for the time being?
That's a weird question. I mean, the way it's worded, I don't know. I mean, I've always, I don't know, man. It's a tough one. I've wanted to do Rumble forever, but a lot of people turned it down. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I mean, Image approved it,
right?
And we went with it.
Yeah.
So I've been pitching it for years, and everybody turned it down.
Interesting.
Yeah, which is hard to believe, but it's doing well, and it's a gorgeous book. The team we have on it, how could it be anything but? But yeah, I left the reason I thought it was sort of weirdly worded is I left B.P.R.D. not because it was time to focus on Rumble, but because I'd been working on it for 11 years, and
sure.
How many stories do you got? And I knew that I was going to start to get stale. As a matter of fact, I sort of felt like there was a little period in there where, like I look at the stuff and I'm like, I was trying as hard as I could, but I look at it now and it doesn't feel as fresh as I would have liked it. I think I ended really strongly. Mm-hmm. And that's what I wanted to do. You don't want to stay too long. I mean, it's just, you go back and you start mining the same veins, and
yeah,
you may not notice it yourself right away, but the readers will. And I was kind of hoping to avoid that. I got my fingers crossed on that one. We'll see.
Well, yeah, and I guess the weird part about the question is the idea that like those two ideas or those two things are connected because
right.
like you can do Rumble and still do B.P.R.D. if you're still feeling B.P.R.D. But I guess. Yes, I understand what you're saying there, but
yeah.
And that was one of the things I was curious about was, I wasn't sure if Rumble was something you developed because you wanted to work with James, or if it was something that you had already had in mind, and it just kind of came to be that James worked on the book after you met him through your work in, on B.P.R.D. and things like that. So it sounds like it's been something that has been, in your mind for quite some time.
Right, but to be fair, when James came along, it really transformed. I mean, considerably,
mm-hmm. And kind of coalesced into a more full idea.
Yeah. It's hard to put my finger on it, but James is able to roll with the punches a lot better than a lot of. He's going to hear this and he's going to get the shit out of me because of the schedule that he's on. But with sort of like tone shifts, a lot of artists that I've worked with, not to say that they're bad artists, but a lot of artists that I've worked with, sort of have problems with that. And James just goes,
mm-hmm.
and he was able to, when I started writing and I started seeing like some of his designs and stuff, I knew the direction that this book needed to go, So yes, it was a book that I've been pitching for a while. But when I met James, it became every bit as much his book
mm-hmm.
as my book. He transformed the way the book came out. And this is especially true in the second arc. I think, not that people will be able to see it, but people will be able to see, what James contributed, et cetera, other than just the art. But people will see that it's growing, and James has everything to do with that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's one thing, and not to turn this into like a James Harren fan club podcast.
That's okay with me, man.
But people always talk about like his ability to, draw amazing monsters and like really kinetic action scenes and things like that. But I think a lot of the stuff that really impressed me the most in his work from what I've seen so far is like how human he can make everything feel, and how like you were saying, like how quickly like the tone can shift. Because I remember when that first press release for Rumble went out, and it was like, the Louis C.K. line and all this stuff like that, and people were like, oh, what is this book gonna be like? And Rumble is really kind of, it's like a stew. It's got a ton of different ingredients in it, but it all coalesces because of the way that like you and James tell this. Well, you and James and Dave and Chris tell the
Dave and Chris.
Tell the story, because like it's really funny, and it's got like the like I got him brutalize his pronunciation, Rathrak.
That's it.
All right, nailed it. So like Rathrak's story, so it's got like the fantasy elements, and it's got all the it's like it's got such a hodgepodge of like genres into just like this one story that totally works. But a lot of it works, like not to downplay your contribution, but like James is so adept at switching between those different elements, that it really makes the book work as well as it does. So I totally see what you're saying.
Oh yeah, again, Dave has a lot to do with that. Yeah, he definitely do not want. And Chris just on his own just came up with the Asu font.
Really?
I didn't tell, and for that matter, Rathrak in black and white lettering. I didn't have anything to do with that. He just came up with that. He's the best, And when I was talking to Eric about lettering and stuff, I know that I'd wanted to work with Chris for years and years and years, but for a variety of reasons, like Dark Horse would have their guys, or DC would have their guys, or Marvel would have their guys. And I didn't, I sort of lost track of him. And Eric mentioned, well, Chris Eliopoulos, someone I work with a lot. I was like, shit, yeah, him, and, it was very, very, and it came out exactly the way I wanted to, which is great. They had the best team, as far as I'm concerned, the best team in comics for this book on it. I just couldn't be happier. And I don't know if you've read issue 6, but those tone shifts, are really, really important to make that work. And I haven't had any complaints from anybody about the way the book looked, you know what I mean? And the way the book read. So yeah, James is, and again, Dave is, they're fucking awesome. James is really, he's killing it.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things that, like, I don't know, like I love comics. Like, people always think about it like writing and art and coloring and all those different things, like they're as different things, like not as like some sort of, it's like, oh, there's the writer and there's the artist and all this. And really it's like I look at this page, like one of my favorite page, or like 2 pages in the entire first volume. It's very random, but I really love the scene where Rathrak and Del run into the dog.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like
how's that random? That's like you knew how hard it was for me to write that page.
No, I wasn't trying to downplay it, but I mean, it's just like, I don't know if necessarily everyone would be like, that dog scene was like the best scene, but I loved it.
He talks about it, which is really gratifying, because it was a really important. It is going to be, as you'll see, a really more important scene, and it is an important scene to the heart of the whole book. Yeah, so I'm really happy that it worked.
Yeah, no, and it works really well. But I mean, it's such a great marriage of all those components you're talking about, like how Chris, like because like I was going to mention that actually I love Rathrak's lettering. I think that's just so fantastic, and it stands out for the characters so well, and it makes him feel, I don't know. I mean, it's like, he's supposed to be different, and he's supposed to stand out compared to these normal guys, Del and Bobby. And I don't know. I mean, I love seeing books that kind of feel like, like sometimes when you first start reading a comic, it feels like it's kind of finding itself. It's like forming itself as like you're reading it. And I kind of feel like Rumble from the very start kind of felt fully formed. If I don't know.
Thank you.
And I think it's because, like, you're saying, like, you have such a ace team, and you guys also, like, you've worked together with Dave, and you've worked together with James quite a bit. I don't know, have you worked with Chris before?
I don't remember if I've admired his work forever. I don't think we ever got to work together. I admired his work when he was working with other people, and I was like, this is a guy. And it never happened. I'm almost positive. I've been doing this a long time. I forget a lot of shit, so don't hold me to that. But I'm pretty sure, I'm almost positive that Rumble's the first thing. And, he's that guy, like the lettering. it isn't fighting against any other element. It immediately melds with the work right there. I'm sure when he read the first script, or the second script, maybe, I don't know which one it was when he came up with Rathrak's, black background and stuff, but whatever it was, it doesn't really matter. He did it, and it's seamless. He's one of those guys that, it's not like Raul Mondesi when he played with the Yankees. Guy had a cannon for an arm, had a bat swing, but just didn't work out in the clubhouse. And with Chris, he works out great in the clubhouse.
Yeah. I love that Raul Mondesi has now come up on this podcast.
Hey, man, that guy, I saw him throw somebody out from right field at home.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you got to be shitting me. But, if it doesn't work in the clubhouse, it doesn't work. I got nothing against Raul Mondesi. Great ball player for his time. Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Well, not to make this a Yankees podcast, but sometimes, some players don't work out, in New York, or particularly the Yankees. It's interesting sometimes when players work out on the Mets, but not the Yankees. It's like there's lower pressure on the Mets or something.
Yeah. Kenny Rogers.
Yeah.
That guy comes in. I mean, he almost lost the World Series. I had anything to do with it. They almost lost the World Series in '96 because Kenny Rogers tanked his start. They sent him back out. I think he pitched another perfect game after he left, or another no-hitter after he left New York. Yeah, it is what it is, man. I mean, I fucking couldn't do it.
Yeah. I totally do the we thing all the time. I'm like, so a perfect example of what we're talking about is I'm a Mariners fan, and Adrian Beltre had his worst seasons with the Mariners, and then he left and became like Babe Ruth at third base, and I'm like, oh my God.
Awesome player. But, A-Rod, I know everybody hates A-Rod because he's so egotistical, but that's the reason he's so great, because he gets in front of these huge crowds and he doesn't give a fuck. And I know you're going to say PEDs, but that's bullshit.
Hey, I wouldn't say that. I watched that kid grow up.
Well, of course, if you're a Mariners fan.
Yeah.
And wherever he goes, he does well, and even after coming back this season, he's hit 31 home runs, man. He's 40. So this guy, I know he kisses himself in the mirror. He's got a painting of himself as a centaur. But I'm sorry, if you want a nice guy, don't look up to a ball player because the only reason because the only reason he's there is because he's got a huge fucking opinion of himself. Barry Sanders, the great Barry Sanders notwithstanding.
I had no idea A-Rod has a picture of himself as a centaur.
Yeah, apparently. I don't know, but it's a great myth if it works. I mean, I don't really give a shit.
Yeah.
And he doesn't disrupt the clubhouse. Obviously, it's not his fault they're tanking this season.
I actually, I completely agree with you. Like, people never were fond of Barry Bonds' personality.
Sure, yeah.
But man, if I was Barry Bonds, I wouldn't care because I'm the best. Even before again, I also don't personally. I don't really care about PEDs that much. And Barry Bonds, anybody who says he wasn't a great baseball player is an insane person.
He's an idiot, yes.
Because I remember watching him with the Pirates when I was a kid, and I was just he if he was playing anybody I remotely liked, I was terrified because he was going to make something happen one way or another.
Yeah, great ball player. And you take this back to Ted Williams, where people were shitting on him because he wouldn't talk to the press. Yeah, okay, so he's not a nice guy. Greatest hitter ever in the game, never been equaled, better than anybody who has ever swung that bat. Got robbed of 5 seasons. Well, not World War II, okay, but got robbed of 2 more seasons by Korea. His last at bat hits a home run. Oh, he's not a nice guy. He's not a nice guy. But there are guys from the Negro Leagues who are in the Hall of Fame today because of Ted Williams. Mm-hmm. Joe DiMaggio had nothing to do with that. Joe DiMaggio, he talks to the press, but he's not really a nice guy, Mm-hmm. Ted Williams was a good man.
Yeah.
And the greatest hitter ever. And there are very few tragedies in sports that don't involve, there are no tragedies in sports that don't involve some poor pitcher flying a plane into a building, something like that, mm-hmm. or somebody dying, Clemente, Thurman Munson, those are tragedies. But if there can be a tragedy about sports, it's that Ted Williams, and I hate the Red Sox. It's that Ted Williams doesn't have a ring. It's ridiculous.
Yeah,
he was an awesome ball player. Yeah, he wasn't nice. Fuck you.
It is kind of interesting how and this goes for all things, not just baseball, but I mean it's always interesting how a lot of times press memory and like public memory really impacts somebody's like not just legacy but their present, because it's like, you know, like you're saying, like A-Rod, I mean, he's hitting like A-Rod hitting 31 homers at 40, regardless of whether or not he is like currently like more like PED than blood or not. Him doing that is unbelievable. I mean, it's amazing. It should be a much bigger story, but it isn't, because people really hate the guy.
Yeah, exactly. He got a whole season taken away from him. Like nobody else in baseball, they get suspended for 52 games. He gets a whole season taken away from him for PADs, and I don't know what the circumstances were. You know, maybe he deserved it. He ended up not appealing it, but whatever. He gets a whole season taken away from him. He's coming back. We have to assume at this point there's no, you know, because he must be getting P tested. And this guy comes out at 40. It's 31 home runs. He gets clutch hits back and forth. You know, like he sometimes carries the whole team on his back. Mm-hmm. And you know, I couldn't last 30 games over 6 months without taking steroids. You know what I mean? Even in my 20s. It's ridiculous that anybody expects these guys to do what they do and not be doing speed or something, you know? It's insane.
Well, especially because, like, and that's the thing about the PED thing that always really bothered me, was that, like, you're talking about these guys, like, they're making the difference between, like, recovering, like, over a month or recovering over 6 months, and then beyond that, like, being able to hit 10 homers or hit 40 homers, and it's like, you know, that doesn't just mean like 30 home runs. That means the difference between like a $2 million contract and a $20 million contract. Right. And so, like, I'm pretty sure most people I know would do whatever they can.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but it's like...
I don't like it, but let's not pretend that it's... we should stop talking about baseball.
Sorry. Like, it was just natural, John. It was just natural.
Yes, of course. I mean, I'm a big baseball fan. Clearly, you are too. So, you know, it's yeah. But I'm glad to hear that someone is. Let's what we got.
Okay, so let's get back into Rumble. But
well, there's something I wanted to get back to that you said earlier. Like you said that Rumble is like a stew of genres, which is interesting to me. And I mean, I think most people who give a shit about Rumble at all would probably agree with you. But to me, it's like. The way I approached Rumble was that, yes, all this shit is coming in, but it would be like, you wouldn't say like that happened to you in your life, that your life was a mixture of genres, right?
No.
It's just the way it goes. And that's the way I wanted to approach this, is that all this shit happens, but in the same way that, you know, you can be at a funeral of a dear, dear friend who you love and be laughing.
Right.
You know, everyone thinks that, you know, that it's got to be all fucking super grim, you know, or it's fucking hilarious. You know, you can't possibly have both of those things in the same issue of a comic without gutting the heart out of the comic. And I don't believe that, because I think the best, I'm not comparing myself to Mark Twain, but look at Huck Finn, for God's sakes, you know, and look at your day. You know, you can be furious about traffic as in the context of someone, you know, wearing your mummified heart on her chest. You know,
I would not be pleased about that.
Yeah, that's not quite up to that, but it's for everyday life. You know, you're furious in traffic, and then someone can say something on the radio, and you're laughing again, and you start laughing at yourself. It happens all the time.
Yeah, well, and you know, honestly, not to like back off of what I was saying, but the thing about something like Rumble is it's I don't know, like the one thing I've always really appreciated about your writing is the fact.
Thank you already.
What's that?
Thank you already.
But it's not about it. Like, people like to put genres on things because it makes it easier to understand. Like, Rumble's a fantasy, Rumble's a comedy, Rumble's this, Rumble's that. But really, like with all of your other work, like you read Major Bummer. And Major Bummer is like ostensibly a superhero-ish book, but it's really about a guy and the things that happen to him. And it's most stories that we read aren't really, you can't genre them because they're everything. They're just about these people in these situations. Yeah. I mean, if they're done right, like I wouldn't want to read a science fiction story that was strictly about, like, I don't know, like whirligigs on a spaceship or something like that.
Right.
But you want to read a story that's about the people on that ship and like what they're doing and things like that. And I guess, you know, you look at Rumble and like you try to define it, and that's where you kind of go wrong, because it's really, like I said, it's a story about Rathrak who's trying to, you know, do these things to bring his life back to where it was, and then you have Bobby who's brought into this situation that he never expected to be in, and it's kind of like, I don't know. I mean, it's just about their journey, and it isn't really one thing. And yes, so I agree with you. That's what I was.
Yeah. I try my best to. What I do better than like the jump in, kick ass, jump out kind of story is a little longer story that I'm trying to, you know, trying to get into what it's like to be a human being. You know, and even if you're a human being that happens to be a possessed scarecrow, you know, you know, because he sees, that's why I think this is important. He sees the eventually named Apache, and you know, he sees himself, and isn't that what we do every fucking day? You know, I mean, when we're at our best. And so that was, I mean, it's like he's on his way to battle, and he's not nearly as into it as Del is, you know? Del is like going on and on and on. And then, you know, he sees this dog and he understands. Well, I'm not going to get too deeply into this because then it'll sound like I'm talking about how great I am. But the idea that we see ourselves in other people, in other animals, I mean, other living things, and even sometimes cartoons and statues and, you know, inanimate objects like our car and stuff. I mean, it's a universal thing, and I don't know. I just that to me just seems so natural, and it's going to make their bond a little more interesting as time goes on.
Yeah. Well, and I really like, you know, it's the very last page of the first volume is such an interesting like character study in Minor, just because it's like, and again, not saying like Minor isn't like it's just one page. You look at it and you have Bobby who's like destroyed by what he just did, and then you have Del who's like kind of like trying to hold back the fact that he's super jacked about going after the lady with the heart around her neck. and then you have Rathrak who's just like, you know, this is his life, and like it's an interesting like one page character study that shows kind of what these three people are all about. And I don't know, I mean, I think those, like, I find the characters to be really fascinating, and they feel really real to me, and I guess that's why the book works as well as it does for me, is because I find myself to be immediately invested, to the point where I remember like when God, I forgot the girl's name, but when she was like, "Go get him, Bobby," I was like, "Yeah, Bobby, go."
Yeah, that line changed at the last minute, and I feel a little bit bad about her arc.
Yeah,
because I you know, I hope the book sells well enough for me to get to it, because her arc has to be the way it is. It's a slow arc, but when in the third volume her arc is finally revealed, everyone will understand why it had to be a slow arc. And the problem is, I just, you know, got my fingers crossed that we can all get there, because I really like her character a lot, and I know that she didn't play as big a role in the first 5 issues as I think I would have liked, and I know other readers might have liked. But it's got to go this way. Like I said, I'm better at the longer game, and the problem is in comics, I think people want it to the payoff to be a little quicker. So I'm hoping I get a chance to get there, because she's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, I was pretty much immediately emotionally invested in her too. So I hope you get there as well.
Thanks.
One of the things that I want to talk about is something you mentioned actually before we started, and you said that you're editing the book yourself.
Yes.
And I'm curious, like, have you ever done that before? And beyond that, like, what complications does that throw into the mix? Is it a different experience because of that?
It's weird. In some ways, not in every aspect of editing. I've been doing it for a while. Like I participate heavily. For instance, when I worked on the B.P.R.D, I participate heavily in the notes. You know, I go out. I've been going out for a long time, finding the artists I want to work with in that regard. But in other regards, you know, no. I really like having a second, or let's say, aside from James, a third set of eyes on my scripts. And it's weird, you know. Like I think that I get to do what I want to do, but I've kind of always gotten that opportunity. Not always. I've had many opportunities to do just what I want to do because I've been very, very fortunate to work with editors that understand. I've got this sort of limited skill set, but I think I'm pretty good in that small little arena. You know, I'm not really good at working with other people's characters. You know, like and keeping the Iron Man continuity going. I'm not really so great at that, but I'm really good at this small skill set, and I need to work within that. And I've been very fortunate that I've worked with editors that say, well, this is what we'll get John to do, as opposed to some idiot calling me up and asking me to do dialogue for a book that, some half-wit wrote, And I'm like, yeah, you don't really, like, I'm going to do a terrible job because you have no idea. This is why editing in comics is so difficult. They think that writers are all interchangeable. And they don't understand that you're going to get a bad product. It's not that, like, I have an ego about writing some half-wits dialogue. It's I'm going to do a bad job. You're not going to be happy. I'm going to lose the job. Why do this? But there are still a handful of editors, fewer and fewer, that do understand what their writers do and use them to really good effect. Tom Brennan being one of those, the great Pete Tomasi being another. Why do I miss him? Obviously, Scott Alley, a few others. These guys are great. They really understand who they're working with, which is why a lot of their books succeed, because they know that the writer they want to work with can do what they want well, and they don't really have to get in his or her way too much. And the same goes for artists. I think a lot of editors think artists are interchangeable. So, yeah, the one aspect about that feeds back into your question is because I know what I do, right? I'm a better editor for myself than if I really, like I would have been 20 years ago. I was like, I can do anything,
Yeah. This is perfect. I don't need to change this at all.
As Clint Eastwood would say, a man's got to know his limitations.
Yeah.
And it's important. I mean, I think you got to dream to get anywhere. You got to have a certain amount of ambition, but you also need to understand, A, what you're interested in doing, and B, how well you do it. And so the way I get past that, not having another set of eyes on my work, is it's a luxury I do not have on other books. Is I write my Rumble script, I go and I write something else, and then I get back to it a week later, and I find all the mistakes I made. And, well, I hope I find all of them. But I find a lot of mistakes I made. And fortunately for me, very fortunately for me, we talked a little bit about this before we started recording. The notion that Image just is like, sink or swim, motherfucker, is not true. I have another set of people that are looking out for me, and they help save me from myself as well. Vince Kakua, who designed the Rumble trade paperback, which I think came out fantastic.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, he did a great job. He's got a really good design sense. He's also a really great guy, which is not a given, but he is also a really great guy. He also works on the production for each floppy. So, stuff comes to him and he spots things and catches them, and he lets me know. And then, and I really am sorry, I forget the woman's name who's now doing the proofreading. But on the first 5 issues, the trade paperback that you read, David Brothers was the proofreader on that. And he is, no offense to who we're working with now, because she's also great. But let's say for that volume, when I was working with him, I felt as if he really was the greatest proofreader I'd ever worked with.
Wow.
And that may not sound like much to a lot of people listening to this, but let me tell you, it really is, because there is a guy who understands writing. He was able to keep me not only from misspelling, which is not really my worst problem in the world. He was able to keep me from making continuity mistakes in styles of the idiosyncrasies of each character's voice.
Right.
It's fucking astonishing. He's amazing. Those two guys, and Jonathan Chan, I don't work with him as closely as I work with Vincent, but he's also up in production. He's also looking out for me. But those two guys, Vincent and David Brothers, on that first volume, they played a huge role. And, I'm really, really happy I worked with them. They're fantastic.
Yeah. Well, one question I had about the design is, like, as far as, Vince's work, do you work, like, did you work with him directly on figuring out the design for both the singles and the trades, or was it just kind of like he was unleashed and that's how it went?
Yeah, I mean, we worked pretty closely with him, but we don't. But the truth is, he did most of it on his own. I think he just has a lot of experience doing it. We talked about things that we liked mostly. He worked more closely with James on the sketchbook section. James worked pretty closely with him on that. He would be the person to ask on that. But on the rest of it, like, the proofs came in and I was like, yeah, this is it. Let's go. I was stunned that there wasn't a lot of back and forth. Yeah, I wouldn't say that he just ran with it, because we did talk about some of the things that we liked, but he picked up on that right away and just nailed it.
I really like the idea, because I think a lot of people don't really have a great idea as to what doing a book at Image is really like. Because like you said, it is kind of like the perception is just like, good luck, see what you're going to find out as you do it. But I mean, it is like having, as somebody who simultaneously, like, I have my wife read my writing first because she doesn't know anything about comics, and if she appreciates,
you got to change that right now.
What?
Go ahead.
She's too nice.
Talk about that another time. Go ahead.
Anyways, but having another set of eyes on that, and somebody, especially somebody like David, who apparently not only is noting, like you were saying, like continuity or like character consistency issues and things like that, like somebody who's not afraid to actually push back and like you need to fix this and stuff like that is, I mean, it's invaluable, especially given the fact that you're editing it yourself.
Absolutely, yeah. And you do. I'm sort of joking about the wife. Yeah, you don't have another eye or a set of eyes there to catch some of the stuff, because you got it inside your head, and especially as a comics writer, you don't do a lot of explaining. You know what I mean, to the reader. You do. And sometimes, even I do this, you don't do a lot of explaining to the artist. So the artist turns in something, and you say, why the fuck did you do that? Because he can't read your mind, motherfucker. So in spite of the fact that I've been doing this so long, sometimes I make that same mistake where I'm like, yeah, I gotta stop that. I can't write something and expect the artist I'm working with, in this case, James, to know exactly what I mean. I've got to be a little more specific on some things and a little less specific on others, but that's another story. And then I've got to work with James so that he very few notes as far as this goes. The clarity of imagery is there,
right?
So that it works in concert with the dialogue, so that everything is clear, or as clear as we need it to be on that page or in that panel. Or if there is no dialogue, it carries that whole burden on its back. The clarity is all there, and that's something I don't think a lot of readers should think about, and that's good, because that means that most writers and artists or cartoonists in general are succeeding.
So I'm gonna, not inadvertently, but I'm gonna throw some shade at another book, not because I don't like the book. I like the book, but there is a Marvel book that I've been catching up on. And one of the things, and it's a very well-respected run, and it's like, very popular. And the problem with it is like almost every single issue, it kind of like it's not just like a recap page in the like dialogue. It reminds you of what the character is all about and like what they've been doing and stuff like that. It's constantly, every single issue is reminding you, and it's like, I don't know. That's one thing I like about Rumble is it's like you guys trust the readers to figure it out.
Right.
And I think
you haven't read issue 6 yet, so I should watch one. Because there's a bit of a recap there, but I think it's handled. And it has the way it makes sense within the continuity of it. I do know what you're talking about, and that that can't entirely be blamed on whichever writer it is that writes that book. And please don't tell me his name or the name of the, or her name or the name of the book, because that is this, as far as I'm concerned, ancient and clearly overused, but for some reason respected trope going back to really past Stan Lee. But that's where everyone likes to stop and kick somebody in the ass. It's Stan, because his take, and a lot of writers take, before Stan, was like, this is the first book that this guy's reading or that this girl's reading, because then it was for boys and girls. Mm-hmm. So we got to remind everybody, and it's a completely different animal now. And I don't really, you're not going to hear me say this often, but I don't blame that writer as much as maybe some other people would, because that writer, he or she, is just inheriting this tradition which has outlived its usefulness.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I actually don't really blame the writer, because I understand that especially with books from Marvel or DC, like they're constantly looking to make those books, well, they're trying to make the books as accessible as they possibly can. So those things are, like you said, tropes that are passed along to do just that, to make them more accessible and to make it easier to understand.
Maybe it's entertaining, but more accessible.
Exactly, yeah, and it works. It works in the context of the story, but it is just interesting because it's like, I understand like kind of going back after like the first arc and everything like that, or going after arcs and like doing slight reminders. But man, like it stands out when it comes, because it's just like I kind of feel like to a certain degree that trope assumes that the people who are reading it aren't smart enough to follow, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, it's a trope that's been out of date for a long time. It's a trope that people have been making fun of for a long, long time. But I'm sure that editors at certain companies still hammer that in to the writers. And I got to tell you, as someone who went through that, it's, at least for someone with my limited skill set, it's almost impossible to do that without sounding very, very clunky. My take on Rumble is that, especially since, the trade paperback market is a big part of the way people read their books anyway. Like, you read this whole thing, you know where we are. I'm never going to leave you completely lost, or we should say are never going to leave you completely lost. But yeah, I mean, I expect the reader that comes to read Rumble not to, be 7 years old. We swear a lot in it. So my expectation is that most people have the continuity of thought and intellect, that they're going to be able to get through it. And I guess you could call it respect, but it's just an expectation that they're not going to be, in grade school, or if they're in grade school, not in, pre-K, let's put it that way.
Yeah. So to spin off this wildly in a different direction, one thing that I thought was interesting was you were saying, you talked about how the book kind of developed in a different way once you had James on board, and he started kind of, you guys started realizing the book more in full. But like, what was James's influence in terms of how the book moved in different directions? Can you even really say that, or is it just kind of been...
It'd be difficult to put into words, but what I will say, and I'll get to this in a second, don't worry, I will answer your question to the best of my abilities, but what I will say is any writer who works with an illustrator or artist, I don't know how you want to put it, in other words, not the cartoonist, the Charles Schultzes of the world,
sure,
all him or herself. Any writer who's going to work with someone else, if his vision is not, and this, believe me, is something I am guilty of, I am not throwing shade, does not or cannot adapt when another artist comes along, or when the artist does something a little differently, maybe you should think about getting another line of work.
Yeah.
But I've absolutely done it, one artist in particular who is tremendous, I was not able to adapt to what that artist was doing. And I'm telling you, this artist is absolutely tremendous. And I look forward, now that I finally know how to write for this person, I'm trying to be as careful as I can, I am very, very much looking forward to working with this artist again, because now I know how I fucked up. I absolutely failed this artist, So I'm not throwing shade so much as I am like saying like, this is something you got to get through your fucking head. I got to get through your fucking head. And James, his stuff ended up being, he ended up being able to do, or he wanted to do, I should say, he wanted to do a lot more, not zany stuff, but he wanted to be more fluid, a little more, what's the word I'm looking for? He wanted the characters to have, B.P.R.D., even on B.P.R.D., as amazing as his stuff there, it's a little tighter, it's a little more conventional, which is not in any way a criticism, because I think The Long Death is one of the very best arcs I ever did on B.P.R.D.
It's fantastic, yeah.
Absolutely everything to do with James, and that's when I understood, here's an artist, we meld, we work together well, but he wanted to have a more of a, what's the word? A looser approach. That's not exactly what I wanted to say and what James was doing to the work. And as a result, I wrote the characters a little differently, and I always wanted the characters to have a certain amount of heart, and I didn't have faith at first that having these characters look this way, that I was still going to be able to make them realistic. But then, when the whole world came together, when I saw all the pages, I understood that was my problem. And that the characters will work because the world works. And James has realized that world in such a way that it is giving me more freedom to write, not looser, but write a different kind of character. Like Del is insane. And yeah, a lot of people sort of like, you got the reluctant hero in
Bobby.
And I don't really know that there's a hero in this story. If that's what you're looking for, I'm not. Maybe this isn't the book for you. I don't want to scare any readers away. It's and Rathrak. I think anybody who's reading the book could easily see him as the bad guy. It's a book about a bunch of people that are going to grow together. And there's a story already. You read it, but it's going to be a larger story that grows from this huge arc. Where everyone does his or her best, and each one of them will be heroes, heroines in their own rights. Nobody will fail except the truly, the people I set up to be the bad guys. But of our core characters, Kogan, the core characters.
Yeah.
They're all going to be complicated and if not likable, understandable characters, I think they're all likable, but that's me.
Well, yeah, I was actually talking to some friends about that on Friday, about how kind of like villains are like a matter of perspective. And, you look at Kogan, he's like, he doesn't pay his tab, but he's a nice dude for the most part. And he's like a friendly guy who like talks with Bobby, and he intermittently like makes a joke at his expense or whatever, but at the same time he seems like a as far as bar regulars go, he seems like a pretty good guy. And like I like that. I like the kind of the complexity to it. And I think quite often, like, it's kind of like the genres thing. I think people like looking at stories regardless of whether or not they're comics or TV or movies or whatever, and they like to put everything in like boxes. Like, you got the hero box and you got the villains box, and it just simplifies things and makes it easier. But I don't know. I think it's a more interesting read just because, like, it isn't so straightforward. And it, like, sure, we root for Rathrak because he is ostensibly like the good guy from his perspective, and he lost his dog, which makes us super sad.
Exactly.
and like,
that's one way James influenced me. The dog didn't exist.
The dog didn't exist, really?
Slanjaw didn't exist before James. It's not like he said, we should have a dog. It's that the more we talked about it, we would meet at this bar. I'm not going to tell you the name of the bar, but we would meet at this bar a lot. He doesn't drink. It's not like we got shit-faced or anything.
It wasn't the shit box?
What's that?
It wasn't the shit box like it says in the sketches in the back?
And over the course of talking to him, Slanjaw was born, and he's like incredibly important to the story. It's not as big as having maybe, I don't know, we'll see. I'd like it to be that big as Jesse Pinkman getting killed at the end of season 1 of Breaking Bad.
Yeah.
but he's like Aaron Paul. He came along like, Slanjaw, I mean. It's like, yeah, man, you need me. So there you go. It's perfect. That's a concrete example of what James absolutely brought to this. Again, he never said we should have a dog. It just developed over the course of our conversations. I saw how important it was.
I do have to say the dog makes, like, in like the flashback sequence in the third issue, it makes Rathrak like way more badass because that dog is awesome. So
again, read issue 6 because Slanjaw's back.
Okay, I need to get on that. So one thing, and this is going to be damn near impossible to answer, so I'm like starting off on the right foot, of course. It seems like, when you work with an artist that you work well with, like, like James or like, Doug on Major Bummer and The Mask and stuff like that. Like, you kind of know, like, there's just something about it. But, like, what is it about a successful working relationship with you and an artist that, I don't know, like, what is it about it that makes you know that this is, like, a great collaboration? Sorry, that's really tricky.
No, it's... I was going to say something earlier, and this kind of ties into it. I haven't read much of what Rick Remender has done at Marvel because it's, what do I care? I have nothing against Rick, but what do I care about any of those characters? And now that I'm doing this, I haven't read much of his stuff at Image, but Fear Agent.
Oh, I love that book.
Oh my God! Right? And that ties into what we were saying earlier, and I broke you off because of Slanjaw. Like, there's a book that succeeds because there are no boxes. The main character is a drunk, and he's a fuck-up, And, but I would love to know how much of that is Tony and how much of that is Rick. And it's very likely that neither one of them could tell me. But they work together so well. And that was such a revelation when I read that book, because before that I'd only known Rick as an artist that had done some fill-in work, and then I read Fear Agent, and I was like, holy shit, And Tony just kills on that book. It's so beautiful. So they might be able to answer the question better than I could, but I only know that Tonchi Zonjic is another guy, the guy who
Officer Johnson.
Officer Johnson with me. There's another guy that I just like. I turn it over, and not that the other artists who I work with are good, but when I turn over this to them, these scripts to them, every one of them is going to come back, and it's going to work, and with Doug especially, that's probably my first experience, when we worked on Homicide and then The Mask and then Major Bummer. I would get the pencils back, and it was the way I saw it in my head, but better because, he's an artist. And then I would challenge, I guess this is part of the answer. I would challenge him harder and harder. Like, he did shit in Major Bummer, which I think every other artist on a monthly schedule would have, put down his pencil and pens and brushes, bought a plane ticket, come over to my house, and killed me. The stuff that he did in there is, and every time I challenged him, he was up to the challenge. And I guess that's part of it, is that you challenge each other, because you both know that you're working towards something that is not bigger than you. A comic isn't bigger than you, but it has less to do with any one person than most people realize. This is my philosophy. And this is why I've reached a completely, what I hope, close to being egoless approach to creating comics. It's not my story. It's not the artist's story, colorist or line artist story. It's the story. And whatever it takes for that to succeed, that's what we all have to do. If an artist catches something I've done wrong, I have to fix it. If I catch something the artist has done wrong, it has to be fixed. If the editor catches it, if the colorist catches it. So it's the story. It's not bigger than us That's fucking Martin Luther King shit, right? Okay. Not pretending to be anything like that, but it is what it is as opposed to who we are. And we can't have a lot of ego about it, or you end up with bad stories. And this is, Citizen Kane. I'm sure people think that Orson Welles had a huge ego, but Citizen Kane never would have succeeded as well as it did. Speaking of another movie or story that has no real hero,
mm-hmm.
At best it has an anti-hero, and I'm not even sure it has an anti-hero.
Yeah.
And it does not have 3x structure, and for that we can all be very happy.
Yeah.
But there's a guy who had to be egoless for it to work. Bernard Herrmann, shit, man. So much of that movie wouldn't work without the music. So much of it wouldn't work without George Coulouris. Without Dorothy Comingore. He produced, and he didn't produce it. I guess House produced it, right?
Mm-hmm.
He wrote and co-wrote, and he even, if you read the credits, he's Mankiewicz gets all the credit. But he directed and starred and supposedly wrote in this movie, and there's a lot of ego, and that's bullshit.
Yeah.
Magnificent Ambersons had we been able to see it exactly the way it was meant to be seen, with the ending and everything, that would have been a movie that would have even been a better example, a more successful movie probably financially than Citizen Kane, and a better example of working within the Hollywood studio and 3x structure. I don't know, does Magnificent Ambersons really have 3x structure? I'm not sure that it does. Anyway, it's more classical.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't quite get to see it, brought to fruition the way he would have liked. But he was going to get better and better up to a point. Maybe he would have tanked out. Everybody does. But I just don't think that he had as big an ego as I think some people would pretend to believe that he did, at least when it came to movie making, because it's so many fucking people involved.
Yeah. Well, to go back to what you were saying about Citizen Kane, like you were saying, at best it has an anti-hero. But I just grabbed my Major Bummer collection, and that book is more or less about a guy who just refuses to be a hero.
Yeah,
and he is, he's more they're protagonists. They're not like anything. They're not plus or minus. They're not good or bad. They're just kind of, sometimes they're bad, sometimes they're good. But
right.
Like
all of us.
What's that?
Like all of us.
Yeah, so. It's interesting that always happens. It's kind of got to be classified into something. But one thing that I thought was interesting that I read recently is Kieran Gillen, writer of The Wicked and Divine and Phonogram and a number of other comics. He wrote something a few years back about how he works with Jamie McKelvey, who's his primary collaborator, and he described themselves as the faux cartoonist, which is basically they work the way that they work together is kind of like what you were describing as to how you work with Doug, where it's what you write is visualized as you want, but better by Doug. And right. it's what you're effectively accomplishing is what the cartoonist is doing, which is a unified vision, but collaboratively. And I think that's interesting because it's obviously that should be what everyone is pursuing. You want to have that unified vision that makes a book that's good, great. And I've seen that. I think it's for James, it's interesting because he hasn't been in comics for that long, really.
He didn't have to be.
Yeah, exactly.
That guy was born knowing how to tell a story. There are a few of them out there. I'm working with this young woman right now who's I need some help, and I come over and I see her pages. I'm like, you don't need my help. I help a little so that I feel like I'm more important than I really am. I'll say maybe this page will work a little bit better. So I do help in the sense that I show her how maybe this would work better to maximum effect. But even though she's done no professional work in comics, mm-hmm. And she's just out of art school and done very little cartooning in art school. I mean, she's done some, obviously, but what she was focusing on was illustration. She knows how to do it. She knows how to compose a page, and it blows my fucking mind.
Yeah.
Some people are, and that's James. He's. I wish I could say what I told him when I first met him, but I can't without making it sound like I dislike another artist. But he's like he seemed to be influenced by another artist. He just could tell a story better than that artist.
Right.
And he keeps getting better and better at that. I worked really hard with him on The Long Death because for some reason he didn't believe that he could draw that he couldn't draw women that well. And I worked with him very closely. It's not like I said, no, you got to do this, you got to do this. I just supported him along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And he turns these pages in The Long Death. And Carla Gerocco, she was great. She was great. And my favorite scene in the book is where she's showing Johann her baby's baptism on her iPhone or Android. I don't remember which it was. And it's perfect. It's perfect. He could draw whatever he wants, but at that time he really didn't think that he could. He just needed someone to tell him that he could.
Yeah.
And so I'm perfectly willing to walk around and tell people that they can do what they already can do. I'm perfectly happy to do it. No one's paying me for it. But then again, why should anybody pay me? Because these people can already do it. They just need someone to sort of poke them. He's super, super talented. And I don't know. Maybe he needs to hear that more. But yeah, he can draw anything he fucking wants.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you hit it on the head when you said he just tells stories so well. And it's like I was saying earlier, I think people have this vision of like his work. They always want to, and he does amazing stuff. Like during Reign of the Black Flame, he had there's the whole boss fight scene basically between him and Liz, which was amazing. But like some of the smaller scenes in there was this one scene, and I don't remember the agent's name, where he had like a cigarette falling out of his mouth. And it was just such a small little moment of just perfect character acting that I don't know. I mean, he's just like a phenomenal storyteller, and enhances everything that's happening on the page and in the story because he is telling the story.
Yeah, no, he's my favorite. My two favorite scenes in that are after Yosef has beaten those two big monsters. I don't know if their names appeared in the book, but they were Kaiserin and what was the other one? Ralph and Kaiserin. Those were two of Hitler's dogs.
Oh,
awesome. And anyway, he's blowing up the building, and one of them is hanging on blowing up the room, and he's standing there with his guts hanging out, and he's looking at his one and a monster that's holding on by a piece of broken facade, and he just looks at the monster and he puts his foot on the piece of broken facade, pushes it, and then and the monster falls, and then he himself collapses, and no dialogue. Perfect, because James is a genius. Mm-hmm. And the other scene I really like is the Suicide Forest, which was incredibly potent, and I don't know how many other artists I could have trusted to pull it off the way that James did. They might be great, you know what I mean? But I just knew when I wrote it that it was going to work. And I know James hated me after that because he did research on the Suicide Forest in Japan for the different stages of decay that some of these bodies are found in.
That's
and it was, of course, incredibly fucking depressing.
Right.
He's like, yeah, thanks for this. No more of that. It's going to be happy from now on. I try to avoid that for James because it's shitty to have to look at that stuff. Not only because it's grim, but because these people, they committed suicide in their worst moments of life, right?
Right.
Nothing could be more pathetic. And you have to have, under those circumstances, rather than somebody you dig out of a grave who died when he was 90, or, at Pompeii, if you can't have compassion for someone who committed suicide, there's a problem with you, right?
Right.
So then you're looking at these bodies in advancing stages of decay, and that compassion just gets the shit kicked out of it. It's got to be rough. I did feel bad about that.
Yeah. So Mark Tweedale,
yeah, sure.
Yeah, he actually owns all those pages.
Yeah, I know. He's very, very happy about that.
Yeah, he was very, very happy.
I think he got a bargain. I think they should have gone for much more. Those were I could never own them because of everything that happened in the development. But and I'm not just I don't just mean because, we can draw like, rotting monsters and rotting people and shit. That's not what makes that scene work.
Mm-hmm.
It's the people's reactions. The guy sitting on the bench with a map in his hand and he's just got his head in his hands.
Yeah.
That's what James did. And he's like I said, it's not an easy thing to pull off. There's a bit of dialogue in those 3 pages.
Yeah. Well, the last question I'm going to have for you, and so Rumble, obviously, it's something that's been in development for a while, and you've been looking to find a home for it and everything like that. But was part of you ended up taking it to Image, and I know that Eric Stevenson at Image had been wanting to work with you for a while, as he had mentioned that to me in the past on an interview, and was part of the reason why you wanted to go to Image, like, were you looking to really like own something that was just entirely your own, or was it was the right place to bring Rumble, basically?
Part of it is the former.
Yeah.
I wanted to go into it with the artist I was working with. Again, it's James in this case. I wanted to go into it with this guy, James, and both of us would have full control over it.
Mm-hmm.
And, we would have full ownership. And it takes a lot of responsibility that a lot of people who go into Image don't realize before they go into it. Maybe there should be a little, video saying, hey, if you ain't serious. But Image has changed some of their policies, so it's a lot more apparent
mm-hmm.
that you have to be serious if you want to bring a book to Image. But part of it was that I absolutely wanted for us to have complete control over it and complete ownership, and frankly, get all the money.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I don't want to get, 10%. I want us to get 100%. That's what I wanted, because I've worked really hard in this business, and for as long as James has worked in it, he's worked really hard.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying we're the only ones. Everybody works really hard in this business, and I think that if you're lucky enough that you can maximize your potential, why the hell wouldn't you? Kind of like we were talking about baseball before, right?
Right.
I mean, but we're not taking the performance-enhancing drugs. I fucking wish something could make me a better writer. It's why not? But here's the other thing. Here's the most important thing. As I told you, I brought it to a few other companies, and every one of them rejected it. Or you know what? Actually, that's not true. No one rejected it. No one ever said anything at all.
That's amazing.
No one said no, which is,
that's even worse.
What's that?
I said that's even worse.
Yeah, if you're a freelancer, no, I can live with. No's good, especially no because. But
Right.
even no is good. No because is better. Yes is the best.
Right.
But no is good. But nobody said anything. One company, I submitted it twice because I was assured the second time I would get a response, and I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
I sent it to Eric, and I'm not making this up. I sent it to Eric at noon my time because I knew he would be in the office
Mm-hmm.
at 9 o'clock in the morning. Before I could get a chance to, because I was like, well, who else am I going to send this to? I did send it to another company, or a couple of other companies. But before I did that, because I was putting together like cover letters, at 12:59, I get an email from Eric. Yes, let's do this. And I was like, it's not so much like the first person who says, yes, I'm going to do it with. That's not, I'm not that easy. I'm a good looking guy. I mean, that kind of enthusiasm. I have never gotten an approval from a company that quickly. He sat and read the whole fucking thing. And it was not as short as some of the because it was an older pitch. Mm-hmm. So it was like 3 pages. He read the whole thing, looked at the images, and I think anybody looking at the images of what James would do.
Right.
I think anybody would say, let's do whatever the fuck John wants to do because he's working with James. You know what I mean?
Right.
But let's set that aside for a moment, for my ego, for just a second. That kind of enthusiasm, there's no price you can put on that. I want to be with a team that wants me to be with that team.
Mm-hmm.
And the other companies I'd sent it to were already companies that had just said nothing to me at all.
Right.
And like, not only is that a lack of enthusiasm, well, I mean, that's basically what it is, I guess. That is indifference, absolutely clarified and crystallized.
Right.
And one of the companies I responded with a good offer, but it was later. You know what I mean? I mean, it was well within the confines of what you would expect, like a week or so. Like you put in a submission. My experience is you wait about a week.
Mm-hmm.
But an hour. How can you not jump on board? Like I said, you want to be with the team that wants you to be with that team, and you want to do well for that team.
Right.
And everybody is in that boat together. Rather than like, yeah, maybe let's think about it. He was like, let's go, man. Yeah. So Eric's enthusiasm and Image's enthusiasm, they've all been great. We absolutely did the right thing. I can get people on the phone at Image, and that's unbelievable. I'll send a query to the accounting department at Image,
mm-hmm.
and I'll get a response like, "Hey, I'm in the office right now. Give me a call." and like I'll send queries to other accounting departments at other companies, and I may not hear back for a week.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's like whatever the outcome. Money-wise, you're with a team of people that love doing what they do, and they want to do it, and they want everybody to be in this with them. And that's, yeah. I know I'm not. It sounds like I'm doing an advertisement for Image, but what can I tell you? This has been the case. They've just been absolutely transparent and aggressively enthusiastic.
Well, yeah.
Why wouldn't you want to be with that team?
Well, and I actually spoke to another creator recently whose book is coming soon. And I remember, he said basically, like, he sent an email to Eric, and Eric responded very quickly, just like yours, and was like, I've been waiting for this, basically. And he's just, like, excited. Like, because again, not to make this like an Image advertisement, but it's like, it's nice to... especially for somebody like you who'd been sending it to people for a while and not been getting any response, to get an immediate positive response. I mean, that says a lot, and it's got to mean a ton too, because it changes everything. I mean, it means not only are you going to be published, but you have somebody who is similarly excited, and that's got to up your personal enthusiasm as well.
Absolutely, that's what I'm talking about. I didn't have to negotiate. He said, "Let's go."
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like he drove up. And he says, "Get in." That's
the dream.
That can't be overestimated.
Are you familiar with the comic Chew, by chance?
Oh yeah, I know John really well.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, so you know his story about bringing Chew everywhere.
Yeah. And Vertigo, at least from what I understand, they actually did reject it twice.
Yeah. So
I don't say anything because Dan DiDio gave me the impression that Vertigo said no twice.
Well, but that's the amazing thing is like sometimes, like, again, at least he got rejections, but that's always the interesting thing is like, choose a book that has done very well and it's won Eisner Awards and Harvey Awards and things like that, and like that was a book that went through a lot of rejections, and I'm not saying that, like, every comic that gets rejected is going to turn into an Eisner winner or something like
Clearly
that.
Not.
but at the same time, it's just like, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting to think like what's out there that could be great that isn't being published simply because, I don't know, it doesn't fit into, again, a box.
And that's why Image is, again, so great. You can do whatever you want there. And, does it get lost in the shuffle? Sure, but it gets lost in the shuffle a lot more if no one ever sees it.
Yeah.
I'm saying there's a potential for it to get lost in the shuffle. Yeah, I'll agree with anybody who says that. But if it's never in the shuffle, I'd rather be in the shuffle.
Yeah, exactly.
John's he's funny because his attitude towards us, how did this happen? I've known him for years when he was still working at Wildstorm and before he became a freelancer. And it's incredibly gratifying to see somebody experience that kind of success, especially. It's like, Sound of the Fury, people rejected Faulkner's Sound of the Fury everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I gotta tell you, I don't even fucking like it. But the point is, it was hugely successful. It's like, I don't know how, but it's translated into other languages because the syntax is so fucking impenetrable.
Yeah.
But that's neither here nor there. The point is, it was a huge success, and that is gratifying for a writer, an artist, a creator of any kind to go through rejection, to begin to doubt him or herself, and then to finally get into that shuffle and have success of any kind is just fantastic. That's another reason Image is so great.
Mm-hmm. Well, John, that's actually all I have for you. But thank you so much for talking to me about all this. And,
Sure, man. I'm blessed.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Off Panel from Sketch.com. You can find this week's guest, John Arcudi, on Twitter at ArcudiJohn and in Rumble at Image Comics with James Harren and B.P.R.D. at Dark Horse Comics with Mike Mignola and a rotating cast of artists. Find more Sketch content on our site at Sketched. That's SKTCHD.com. Follow us on Twitter at SketchComic and find us on Facebook at /Sketched. Thanks for listening and tune in next week for another episode.